Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode and we have our famous speakers, Professor Donald's, Mr. Robs and Dr. Eric. And they always support World Talent Economy Forum and they are working with World Talent Economy Forums and they are our advisors. Hopefully soon we will bring more interesting activities. We are just discussing and we will work together and hopefully it will be very, very helpful for this Asia Pacific, especially the corporations, the governments, as well as policymakers and different universities. Those who are actually supporting World Talent Economy Forums, every day you are calling me and you communicate with us. If you need any kind of like intellectual support from our communities, you can directly communicate with us. I'm sure Professor Donald, Dr. Eric, and Mr. Rob, everybody will support to our local ecosystem. So I want to start from Professor Donald. How do you want to analyze today's topic, driving growth using practical wisdom? So I think utilizing the practical wisdom is very important. So how it works, how we can think systematically.
Well, I would take practical wisdom to mean grassroots knowledge, the kind of wisdom that people gain by actually doing things. And through I think there might be, you might look at it as two ways. One of them is the idea that you go to a business school and you get an MBA and you run a company based on the knowledge that you've gained going to business school, which can be very, very valuable. I want to make a side note. I read an interesting book on the history of business schools. And when they started business schools, people thought it was ridiculous because they said business is an intuitive thing. It's a skill that some people have and some people don't, like playing music or being a great painter. They did not see it in any way as being something that could be taught. And so the first business school was Harvard Business School, and they flopped. They just never could get anybody to go there. And then they got this idea of borrowing the case study method from law. And they started the Harvard Business Review as basically their marketing arm. And because of these interesting case studies, they expanded and they started business schools. Another side note is that when they wanted to teach economics, there was basically two kinds of economics at the time. One was historical economics, which was very tied with sociology. So people like Max Weber and others were from that basically thread. And if you look at Adam Smith, for an instance, he had a great deal of stuff about morality and other things which modern economics don't. At the same time, there was what we call classical economics, or maybe neo-early, and that was very quantitatively driven. And because it was quantitatively driven, it could be considered to be, quote, scientific, unquote. And so modern economics has been based on the idea of rational choice and the idea that you can actually quantize economic growth. So I would say that, and that kind of led to problems, some of the problems we have in our society, because basically using that as a system of measurement has been ignoring all the other things. In fact, if you look at Max Weber, he said that a leader's job, the CEO of a company, was to create meaning for people so that they would get up in the morning and they would do something and they had a purpose. And so the whole idea. So going back to practical wisdom, I think that even though we have gotten to this idea that everything can be measured quantitatively and the business schools teach it in that kind of a way, I think Weber was right that real leaders and leadership are people who can create meaning for people, that they make something that when people get up in the morning and they work on it, they feel like they're contributing to the world. They feel like they're making something, they're being creative and doing something for the world. And ultimately, as we've said so many times on this show, businesses solve problems. and that's what they do. I mean, that's the core to what they do, and the problems are buried in the life of regular people. So the practical wisdom that can be gained from looking around you and listening to the solutions that people have, the popular wisdom is really, I think, kind of the key to making not just successful companies, but also sustainable companies that actually address the issues of people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our Professor Adrian. He is a young global leader for World Economy Forums. So hopefully we will learn many interesting things from him. So I directly want to ask our analyst, our scholars, Mr. Rob. So how do you want to analyze to this topic?
Well, when you're looking at practical, I guess it's an interesting topic. I used to run a Tiger team in IBM. It was the only Tiger team at the time, and our task was to go into acquired companies and fix them. And invariably, what we would find was a combination of problems. Some of them coming out of whatever people were doing when they were trying to position their company for sale. Where they often made the company look good on a balance sheet and financial statement, but they would destroy the sustaining capabilities of the firm, and we'd have to go and figure out what they broke and how to fix it. We came up with a series of kind of rules in terms of looking for whether the management was competent or not. One, of course, was just the standard stuff: are they self-dealing? Is management doing things that benefits them individually, but not the company as a whole? Then we would also look to see whether the right skills were in place to do the job. That was kind of interesting, because there are a lot of companies that seem to believe you can put warm bodies into management and it doesn't matter what the background is. And we didn't find that to be an accurate way or an effective way to staff the management ranks. And then finally, it was really critical that people kind of understood what business their company was in. And it's surprising how many employees don't. Thomas Watson Jr. was famous at IBM for when he visited a site, he would go and take a worker aside and ask him how that worker fit within the overall massive machine that IBM was. In other words, how did their contribution make a difference? And if they couldn't answer the question, he didn't punish the worker. He punished the worker's upline. In other words, their managers and managers' managers, because he felt very strongly that every worker should know how they fit inside the company, what contribution they made, and how much and how they made a difference. If they didn't know that, then how in the world, and I tend to agree with this, how in the world can they properly function? One of the quotes I used to use when I was teaching management was from Sun Tzu, who was a general thousands of years ago, that made a series of statements with regard to how to fight wars. And many of the statements work with business. The Art of War is a decent book to read for any aspiring manager, because the concepts are relatively simple. And it's just fascinating that they're 2,000 years old and still valid. But my favorite is, know the enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles, you will never be in peril. When you are ignorant of the enemy, but know yourself, your chances of winning or losing are equal. And if ignorant of both your enemy and yourself, you're certain in every battle to be in peril. In other words, you're going to lose. And the fact of the matter is if you're talking about any company and any company management, they need to know the market, they need to know their competitors, and they need to know their own capabilities. Otherwise, they will fail miserably. I was just writing a paper the other day on some of the biggest disasters that I had the dishonor to oversee, and in almost all cases, they happened because executive management did not understand the business that they were in, did not understand the capabilities of their company, and fundamentally didn't understand who or what their competitors were. In fact, in many cases, didn't even really know what market they were in. So those are all critical things when you're trying to manage a business from the fundamentals. You really need to know that business first, and then you can make decisions with regard to the business's best interest. But if you're insular and you're mostly working off of theories in your gut, it's not going to end well. And so best management practice is to really learn about the environment, learn about the company, and understand the competitive landscape you're operating in, and then you can do reasonably well.
Thank you. Dr. Eric Du, how do you want to analyze today's topic?
It's a very, excuse me, this is a very general question, right? Practical wisdom. What exactly do you mean by that? Ultimately, if I were to sort of parse it myself, practical wisdom would be, in effect, the market, right? If you were talking in terms of business and making money and such, you're talking about the mass, the market, the people, and in the way the market speaks. So if they like product X, then give them product X, right? You don't want to give them something that they don't like, and we've seen that in here in the United States, at least, and probably what happens in the United States, at least in the last 50 years, is what happens to the world. So we have seen examples where certain technologies try to grow, and it can't because the market wasn't quite there to accept it. And then version 2.0, sometime later, when the market accepted it, then it grew, right? So we've seen examples of things of that sort. One great example is the electric car, which is growing right now. 20 years ago, there was an attempt to have electric cars. Now, to be sure, it was not as efficient and is not as sleek and not as snazzy as the current versions like Teslas and so forth, but it was not growing very well, and there might have been other issues for not growing. But now, everybody's taking on to the idea of an electric car, and the whole concept of it is growing. But this practical wisdom is sort of a double-edged sword. There is a benefit in that if you tap into what people want, right? If the people have this idea, their wisdom, that this is a good idea, this is a good thing to do, and you tap into that, then you will be successful. It will be much easier to push through a policy. If you're in the government, it's much easier to do certain things if you have adoption of it. At the same time, practical wisdom, at least in my view of what that phrase is also institutional knowledge, institutional thinking. And as what Rob mentioned, institutional thinking is sort of like the way, this is how we've been doing things. Okay, this is how managers, how governments, and how society says, this is how we always do things. Here in America, we speak English, things like that, and that prevents disruptive things from entering and catching on. Disruptive things that can be beneficial to the society, to whatever, but is resistant because practical wisdom is holding it back. So it's a double-edged sword. Okay, you need to have people who are also iconoclasts, who think differently, who are willing to break whatever practical wisdom is, to adopt modern technology, it doesn't even have to be modern, but different technology for one thing, different policies, different ways of doing things. People who are willing to take that chance to do something different, okay, will eventually, and it may not work, right, could eventually, wake up the rest of the masses to say, hey, yes, we really could do that, and they do it, okay? Here, for example, here in America, we have a one language policy in schooling, right? It's English, right? We teach English, and we don't want Spanish. We definitely don't want Arabic for sure, right? I mean, there's no way we can have Arabic, but we're gonna, we don't want Spanish speakers, and we don't want any whatever other languages. But if you go to every other country in the world, it's at least 3 languages, right? It's They all teach English as a second language, and everyone is friggin' fluent, like you are, you know, in English. They speak their native national language, and if their nation has a an older language like Gaelic in Wales, right? Or yeah, so it's Welsh Gaelic or Welsh. Sorry, I made a mistake. But you know, in Ireland it's Gaelic, and in Scotland it's Scottish Gaelic, and in Finland they have both Finnish and also Sumi or whatever it is. They speak those, and then they speak another foreign language like, you know, if you're in Scandinavia, you might learn German or French or something like that. So they are fluent in multiple languages, and it's nothing. It's completely common for them. Whereas here in America, oh, you don't. All you need to know is English, and some of them they barely know that. Okay, and they decry anyone trying to learn another language, and that's practical wisdom turned on its head in a way, right?
Thank you, Professor Adrian. You are a great analyst, I want to say, with the experience from Asia Pacific. Even though right now you are in Australia, but I am sure that Malaysia, Singapore, even as Japan, you have a very like good relations with the local ecosystem. So, sir, how do you want to analyze this point, especially from the Asia Pacific culture?
Yes, well, actually, Australia likes to think they're part of Asia Pacific as well. But anyway, well, I think for this topic in Asia Pacific, you know, I've lived in Malaysia, Singapore, and Japan, and I think one common thread was, for example, in Singapore and Japan, but less so Malaysia. There's no real natural resources. So like in Australia, where I am now in Adelaide, Australia, it's a very, very wealthy country because basically there's huge amounts of land, huge amounts of minerals, gold, diamonds, oil. But if you look at Singapore, especially, there's no natural resources. And Japan is very similar, actually. They don't really have any, natural resources. So both Singapore and Japan really depend on the people to generate the economy, and that's why I think that you see Japan is a huge exporter of goods. And Singapore to another extent is like a kind of financial hub. They rely on the people to generate the economy. Malaysia not so much, because Malaysia has a lot of gas and oil and palm trees. So I think you can see that those countries which don't have natural resources, they really rely on the people, and that's probably what really spurred the whether it's the government or the people themselves to become innovators and manufacturers. So I think that is I don't think we can really look at Asia Pacific as it's very different situations. Even you just take difference between Malaysia and Singapore, right? As I said, Singapore doesn't have any resources, so they rely on their people. But Malaysia, to a certain extent, they have a lot of resources. So in some respect, the people don't have to work as hard. So even within Asia Pacific, I think the economy very much depends on the availability of the wealth of the land, so to speak. And in Japan's case, it was the great, it really greatly spurred the economy to, become one of the top in the world. It was number 2 at one stage. Now of course, it's China, but it was number 2 in the world at one stage, which is quite incredible for a small island nation. If you go back in history a bit, England was the same. It's a small island, of Europe, but at one stage they were the strongest country in the world, and similarly they don't have a lot of natural resources in the land, but they were great traders, and so I think you see this going through the threads of history. So so that's my observation of Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you, Professor. Professor Donalds. So you are from academy, and you also have experience from corporation. I think everybody has experience from academy as well as strong engagement with the corporation. So my question is that example from Asia Pacific. Personally, I know many entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur. They are not highly educated. They are not get very good academic knowledge or anything, but practically they are very successful with their entrepreneurial activities, and now many educated people's working inside in their organizations. The same thing happen in USA, or what the issue behind that, like that entrepreneurial mindset and institutional education? Is there any gap, or is there anything that we can work for modern education system?
I want to piggyback a little bit to answer that question off of what Eric said. And one thing I have to say that's kind of amusing is when I got my graduate degrees in Finland, I was required to take an English competency test. It was required. Fortunately, I passed. I do my best. And no matter what language, you're still always going to be struggling. So anyway, and I also want to piggyback on what Adrian said, which is that Finland is another example of a country with absolutely no natural resources. The one natural resource they had was pine tar. Sometimes not even that. They had pine tar, and they could use it to sell it to people that were making ships. But we don't use pine tar for ships anymore. Though actually Finland does have a gigantic shipbuilding industry, but they have to buy all the materials from somewhere else and put it together. So that's similar to Japan, where they're manufacturing things with resources they get from elsewhere. But back to your question, I think, again, I'm going to piggyback off of something Eric said, which is we have the idea of tacit knowledge. And when you start to learn to do something, at first, when you learn to do it, you have to basically follow some pre-existing steps. Like you're learning guitar, for an instance. You don't start playing like Chet Atkins or something like that. You start out basically coercing your fingers into doing the most simple things. They just won't do it. Oh, come on, finger, I want you to be on this fret. But you kind of almost have to take the other hand and place it there at first. But eventually you don't remember you don't know what you're doing. It doesn't have a beginning or an end or a middle. It becomes in you. And even people who are doing wonderful solos like Charlie Parker that are beyond anything that you can do, well, not on guitar, but he gets copied by a lot of people, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, and things like that. They learn teeny little pieces that they know perfectly, and then they put them together in different orders. But I have a friend who was a consultant to a gigantic perfume company in Europe. And all of a sudden, they were running into major problems. And he went in and investigated, and he found out there was this one old guy who'd worked there since the beginning of the company who had this perfect nose. And he was the person that was judging the perfume combinations all this time. And some MBAs got in there and they decided, okay, we're going to reorganize and save money and blah, blah, blah. And they reorganized, and this guy was gone. And after this guy was gone, there wasn't the institutional knowledge or the tacit knowledge anymore in the company to be able to make it work. So and another example is my uncle had one of the bigger construction companies, electrical engineering type construction companies. He put the lights on the Golden Gate Bridge and the Hollywood Freeway and things like that here in California. And he always told me he actually was very well educated, but not in business. He went to Stanford, and Fred Terman was his professor in electrical engineering.
Wow, okay.
He always told me, he said, I don't even know what the people that work for me do anymore. They're so good at what they do. They've worked for me for 20, 30, 40 years. And I let them do what they know how to do. He said, it's not my job to micromanage any of them. And the people, if they work, you can think they worked for him for 20, 30, 40 years. They must have loved him, and they did. I mean, he felt an obligation to treat the employees well. He said, all of my employees put food on their table because they're working at my company. And my job is to make sure that they continue to be able to do that. That's what he considered to be his job. And so I think the whole idea of practical wisdom is embedded in even companies that are on the public market. And I think it talks to something that Rob was saying, is that sometimes people go in the MBAs and all they do is look at the balance sheet. And so what they'll wind up doing is firing the exact people that make their company happen. So I think that if you're I think that entrepreneurs do what I said originally and create meaning and create a situation, and that has a lot to do with empathy. And even, I mean, what are markets? Markets are abstract. But somebody who can really listen to people and hear and feel what's going on, they can understand what the market is. But when it's completely abstract sometimes, and people get removed from what it is, and it just becomes numbers on a piece of paper, sometimes they can completely lose it. I'm not saying that the numbers aren't important, of course, but you have to have a real combination of the two. So I think the greatest practical wisdom is empathy.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, you write many things and many newspapers and even World Talent Economy Forum. We are big fan of your writing and everything. So what's your analysis and what's your guideline for new entrepreneurs?
Well, the thing that really makes the difference between somebody that's successful and somebody that's not is how they set their initial goals and how much effort they're willing to put into the project. I've seen a lot of people thinking that entrepreneurship is a fast path to getting wealthy, and it can be, but if wealth is the goal, they're very seldom successful. Because they try to jump ahead, expenses get out of line with income, and the companies tend to fail. And so it's important, if you're going to be successful as one, you need to have a passion for the work. And the screwy thing is, even if you don't get rich, having a passion for the work makes the work worthwhile. I mean, you enjoy it. It's thinking through the old adage that it's the trip is where the interest is, not the destination. And way too many people just have this idea that, I'm going to form a business, I'm going to be driving Ferraris and having hot women or whatever. And that's not what it is. And when you have that mixed mindset, invariably they'll self-destruct. So the first step is put the wealth aside, do something you have a passion for, something you're interested in, something you'd be willing to work 24/7 on. And you've got a much higher probability of being successful because you're interested in it. You're going to learn about it. You're not going to fight the hard work. You're going to enjoy it, and that means the stuff that needs to get done gets done. Donald was talking about something. Back, it was funny because he was talking on both sides of something that drives me a bit nuts. But he was talking about a friend of his that didn't know what his people did, but knew that he was responsible for allowing them to do it effectively, and that kind of goes to several of the problems we used to run into is it's very hard to enable somebody if you don't know what it is they do. So Donald was right with regard to the goal, but the problem he highlighted is the fact that a lot of people get to be CEOs of companies, and so much time has gone by, they no longer know how the company operates. The things have changed. If you spend 30 years in your career becoming CEO, the things your company was doing at the beginning of your career were probably a lot different than the things that they're doing now. And if you don't keep track of them, you're going to break stuff that you don't know you're breaking. And certain things every executive should be required to learn. Donald pointed out empathy. Empathy is a dual-edged sword. Of the preponderance of successful people as CEOs that are not empathetic is both a problem and a sad statement about the companies that we have in the world at the moment. Honestly, I don't believe you can be successful long term without empathy, because what you do is you get somebody in that lacks empathy, and what they'll do is they'll make the company look good during their tenure, and then whoever takes over after them finds a huge mess, and they don't care because it's not their company anymore. When I say they, I mean the departing CEO. And that becomes problematic. So empathy is critical to the knowledge base of a leader. But in the end, it's a case of really understanding the business that you're in, understanding what it takes to do that business successfully, and putting aside your personal wealth in favor of making the company successful. And you will most certainly do better. One thing that's happened recently that gives me hope we might be able to scale some best practices is a project out of IBM called Project Debater. Now, Project Debater started off out of IBM Watson, which was created initially to win a game, the game of Jeopardy, and then it migrated first into the medical field to point people to remedies that otherwise wouldn't be found. Project Debater took a different step. It was designed to allow the computer to enter into an open debate and discuss a topic on its merits. And applied in business, it could solve some of the biggest problems I've seen. And the problem that I'm talking about that tends to break a lot of businesses is the problem where the loudest voice at the table wins. And it may not, and it's often not the most experienced voice. It's not the voice that's right. It's just the loudest. The example I used when I wrote this up was Steve Ballmer at Microsoft, a very powerful individual in person, a very hard guy to argue with. I'd known him for a number of years before he took over, but it was hard to disagree with him because he would drive you into the ground. And it wasn't that he wasn't smart. He ran a class at Microsoft where he showcased just how quick he was mathematically, but it was more kind of for a forcing function, because he was managing a company that was run by programmers, but he wasn't one. And so he wanted to show people that he was smarter than they were. Inevitably, that was a mistake because you alienate folks and then you don't learn the skills that you need to learn. So the example I was giving is the one where when Microsoft was going to go after the iPod. And Steve Ballmer was convinced that the right thing to do was to create an iPod clone, when his executive underneath him felt the right thing to do was to create an iPhone. There was no iPhone at that time. But to actually merge what Microsoft was doing well with what Apple was doing well and create something different, something differentiable, and take the market that way, that he really couldn't build a better product that was defined by his competitor. Apple was always going to have the best iPod. Uddin wasn't going to be able to do it. Now, to be clear, that he did lay out a set of conditions that he wanted done to make it successful, and they didn't execute either. But in the end, that loudest voice at the table winning caused them to lose a multi-billion-dollar effort, and it was one of the biggest failures that he had while he was CEO, and it led to his eventual termination. It's that fundamental need to make sure that not the loudest person prevails in an argument, but the person that's the most right prevails. The goal is to get the right answer. The goal is not to make the guy at the head of the company or the most powerful individual of the company look right. And it's those kinds of mistakes that can destroy companies. And so the idea with Project Debater is you have a system that could step in and consistently point to the best researched answer, the most correct answer, the one that's most supported by empirical evidence, and get these decisions that are made on gut devalued and or at least positioned against the knowledge that exists in the space. A company is as strong as the culmination of its people, but if the smartest people in the company are silenced, you're not going to make progress. And so, in the end, really making sure that the company is run collaboratively, that the people that have the most experience get voice, and that you never go down a path where the company is focused on making any one or small group of people wealthy, will result in a far better outcome than otherwise.
Thank you, sir. I just want to share one point. I'm just sharing this IBM debate. Like last year, 2019 February, there is a debate in between Harish Natarajan's and IBM computers. Actually, I'm also from debating communities, and Harish from University of Cambridge in the Cambridge Unions. So we do a lot of debate, and he's one of the great debaters. And I feel proud that yes, even in he visited Malaysia. I think his father live in Singapore. So this is very interesting example that how actually like technology actually even start to doing debate and come up with a very interesting analysis. Especially debate is very difficult. I want to say it's not easy because instantly they have to do. And Harris is a world-class debater. But anyway, I think that debate actually Harris win the debate or something like that. Maybe there are new versions of like computers or AI maybe come soon, and maybe they will give some good analysis.
Well,
yeah.
remember in debate, unlike Jeopardy, the judging is subjective, and
okay,
so
yes.
the debate that I saw with Project Debater, I would have given the award to Project Debater. It was the system was much more interesting to listen to. It included much more entertaining, and it was always factually based. But in debate, it's not necessarily in a debate competition. It's not necessarily who's right. It's who can sustain the argument. And I honestly, I think the judges were a little bit leery of giving the computer the win, which is why they gave it to the human. But it was very close regardless. I mean, clearly a top debater is capable of carrying an argument. It's just that Watson can use the sum total of knowledge it has access to counter the argument. And it's hard if you're gonna judge on fact. It's really hard to judge against a computer because they can just bring more facts to the table if they're properly curated. But in any case, it's an interesting thing to watch. But my point is what it does is it forces people to make their delineation in terms of what decision to follow on what is supported by fact and evidence, as opposed to what's supported by the loudest voice in the room, which can be, or most powerful person in the room, which can be problematic because power and loudness don't equate to being right. Facts, research, evidence, that's what should support being right.
And definitely Harris actually world debate champion. He was champion in Europe. He was champion in World Debating Championship, and World Debating Championship, one of the largest, I think, intellectual activities around the world. So yes, definitely I saw that debate and I really enjoyed how actually technology and human things progress. And definitely it's really tough call. That's what I'm sure. That was really tough call. Yes, Dr. Eric. Yes.
Now, now that we gone around the panels here, I have a better idea of what the concept of practical wisdom is, as differentiating from, I assume, academic wisdom. And in a way, schools do not teach, well, I guess they teach practical wisdom as well, but it may be something that's 100, 200 years old or something like that, depending on what it is. And part of the reason for this is that the schools have their own institutional history in the way that they've been done. And when I talk about schools, I'm talking about universities, colleges, and such. And they've been doing it that way because it was useful back when universities started. And one was a University of Bologna, I believe, was one of the first in 1200s, I believe, or something. in Italy, although I think it's possible that there were university-like academic institutions in the East that we here in the Western civilization aren't familiar with. And there may have been universities also in Africa that we're not familiar with because, you know, we are biased in our Western civilization kind of a history. But whatever it is, the way that they learn and the way they teach, right, has sort of continued on its own track that is separate from what people call practical wisdom, which is something that they need to do to put food on their table. And sometimes learning things like pi r square and a square plus b square equals a c square type of thing doesn't necessarily put food on your table. And people don't really associate the two. And so they go like, I don't need to learn those highfalutin stuff. I rather learn more practical stuff so I can, you know, figure out how to put food on my table. And in a way that is true. Okay. And in the first round of discussions, we were talking about business schools. In a way, business schools is sort of an attempt to revert back to putting food on the table kind of knowledge. Except it's taught by people who have so long experience in the more academic style of teaching, so that they don't tell you all the practical stuff like, hey, this is what you need to know to get your business going. Okay. I went to Holt International Business School about 7 years ago, and they do both. They teach the traditional way, you know, case studies and you know, balance sheets and all these other stuff. But then at the latter part of the course, they had basically something equivalent to the executive MBA type of courses, where they say, hey, you got to do this, you know, and one of the things that we talked about here in this discussion, empathy with your employees. Okay, executive MBA is to teach CEOs and things like that, and it is to tell them, don't F up your employees, because ultimately your employees really is the company. It's not the intellectual properties that you make. It's not the inventory that you have. It's not the machines and the equipment. None of those things make your company. It's ultimately the people that you have that makes your company. And that goes back to what Adrian was talking about in terms of natural resources and such. If you think of a company as like a nation or something like that, then people think of their PP&E, plants, property, and equipment. They think of that as their natural resources and acquiring them as assets as their natural resources. But ultimately, the only natural resource that you have are your people. In the same way that the only natural resource that you have in a nation, as a city, as a state or region, the only natural resource is your people. Okay, because people make the natural resources become valuable. Oil has been around since 500 million years ago. I don't know how long oil has been around. Okay, people saw oil back during the Roman age. People saw oil during the Egyptian age. I mean, they freaking lived in that place, right? I mean, you're talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates. That's where oil is. And they saw oil. It's not like they never saw oil before, okay? It's bubbling out of the ground out there, okay? But they didn't make it out of it. They didn't make use of it in the way that we make use of it, right? Right now, we are possibly at the end stage of the oil age, okay? Which started about 120, 150 years ago, okay? But oil was around. It was the same natural resource back then as it is now. Why is this so valuable now where people will kill each other for it? Whereas back then it was like, get rid of this stuff. You know, we want to grow food. We want to grow plants here. And this thing is bubbling up and killing our plants. Okay. Natural resources is what you make of things. Okay. And what you make of things is based on the people. Okay. And if you want them to be able to make things out of some of the most ordinary, boring, bland stuff, you got to have creative people there to think about it. And academic knowledge does help in doing that, because when you learn things about chemistry and you learn things about physics and all that, then you can be able to see it from that angle and recognize, oh, this thing here, you can take this oil and if you burn it and you can, use it as energy, and then it's physics who would think, energy, you can convert energy from, chemical energy into heat energy, into mechanical energy, which will allow you to do X, Y, Z. That's the conversion of energy, the ability to convert energy from one form to another, okay, is really our first industrial revolution. Okay, the first industrial revolution is something that took roughly 1,500 years, recognizing that we can convert chemical energy that's stored in oil and coal and all that into heat energy, okay, which allowed, by burning, which allowed us to heat up steam, which was then used to, push a piston to convert it into mechanical energy. The commodification of energy is really the first industrial revolution. Okay, prior to being able to commodify energy, you have to build your mill next to a river, because mechanical is mechanical and you can't do anything else. Okay, and you burn heat and then you just put your hands in front of the fire and then you feel the heat and that's it. Okay, and the light that it comes out, that's all you get from the light energy. You don't have a way to convert one to another, and that was pre-industrial revolution in terms of energy use. And then the conversion of energy from one form to another really is the essence of the first industrial revolution. Okay, so but anyway, that's practical knowledge is really being able to put food on your table, I think, versus the more highfalutin abstract knowledge of academia. But academia does have its value in that it gives people the ability to think in a more grander scheme, so that when you get used to putting food on the table the same way that you do, okay, and putting food on your table is no different between the lowest employee to the Steve Ballmers. Okay, the Steve Ballmers in the world have to put food on their own table as well, and they keep thinking the same way. And for them to inject new thought into themselves to be able to think in a different way, that's where you have to bring in other people, so that other people's views will help influence and shape your views and be able to change your way of thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Eric. We have our great analysts, even politicians and like UN WTO secretary generals, and the many important roles actually like he plays, and he's also working with World Talent Economy Forum as our advisor. Thank you for joining today. He has some internet issues, so that's why he cannot join early. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I'm very apologetic. I could not join the link. For some reason, the link that you sent me always gotten me to a blank stage. Now my telephone is working, not my iPad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining today. Professor Adrian, yes. So you are from academia, and how do you want to analyze Dr. Eric's point of views? And
yeah, I agree totally. Basically, I think the longer one works as a academic, I've been a professor, previously associate professor and assistant professor. Basically, honestly speaking, academia is just like any other kind of career, and people want to go up the ladder, so they start off as a Ph.D. student, and then research fellow, and then lecturer, etc., right up to professor. And at each stage of the let's say going up the ladder, you have basically there's only one thing you have to produce, or maybe two. One is you have to show that you can write academic papers to a high academic value, and the academic value is it in a prestigious journal? Is it cited by many people, many other academics? Second one is bringing in research funding, people don't realize it, but universities are very money-hungry machines, and professors' job is to bring in money. So I think those two things is extremely unrelated to anything practical in industry. So that's why, if any, let's say, I'm in the field of electrical engineering. If you ask a very successful electrical engineer, maybe CEO of a big company, to just try to read some paper in the IEEE, transactions, she or he probably would not even understand what is that paper about, and also think it has zero practical value. So yes, academia, unfortunately, because of the way it's set up, because professors are just human beings as well, they just want to move up the career ladder and become a full professor and then retire, maybe emeritus professor. But I wouldn't say zero value. I would say that academia produces value in the very long term, like 30, 40, 50 years later. So for example, if you look at the internet, maybe 2000 was around the start of the internet era. Well, that really started from at that stage defense research project in America and USA, DARPA, in the 60s. So, it took about 40, 50 years, but and there's no really direct link between the, first academic internet and the, what we see now. There's no direct link as such, but definitely it was, it was born from academic research. So I think we have to realize there is a contribution by academia. Probably only 1% of professors will contribute to anything practical, maybe even less than 1%. And the effects are going to be far off in the future. Normally, of course, there is some exceptions. If you look at Google, that was formed by a couple of Ph.D. students, but they were dropouts. Actually, they probably wouldn't be very successful as academics. So in general, there's no real correlation between successful professors, academics, and industry. But I think in the long term, if you look at 30, 40, 50 years, then you can see the contribution of research. But normally the professor is long gone, already retired, maybe passed away before his or her contributions become practical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor. We have our honorable guest, Dr. Talib. Sir, here everyone very successful academically and their corporate careers and everywhere, all of our speakers. But I have a special question for you, because you get all of the big position like ministers and the UN Secretary Generals, even many important position right now you are working, as well as I saw that you have a very strong academic background. What type of strategy actually help you to achieve these big positions? Like I would love to learn. At least I'm young, I love to learn. Maybe other panelists, they have different views.
Thank you so much, Sharif. Thank you. I did spend 20 years of my life in academia. When I first graduated from University of Cairo in Egypt, then I went to work at the University of Jordan in administrative work. I then joined the Israeli School of Architecture. I'm an architect by profession. I then took my scholarship and went to the US. I got my master's from IIT in Chicago, my Ph.D. from University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then I came back and taught for another 10 years. So I'm quite versed in the academic world. Now, what I believe in, I think that the world of academia is an important world, but it doesn't make people academia. What makes people is the environment that you brought up in. I did achieve so much success in my life. I was lucky. But that did not happen because I was well educated, because I graduated from University of Pennsylvania, for example. Not at all. To the personality. How do you build a personality? in any young man. I think that's a very key
Mhm.
and important element there. It's not just what you learn in terms of academia.
Mhm.
It's the models that you present as a teacher to your students. I still have a very good relation with all my students because they connect with me as a human being. That's the most important part.
Mhm.
Now I want to say something about education. I heard a little bit before, and people are people all over the world, no matter what they are come from. You know, people from China, people from Japan, people from Germany are not better than any other people, or worse. People are people. They develop cultures based on their history and their leadership. So it's the leadership that makes the people. I always say this, you can't blame any people for doing something because the people are who we make them. What makes them, not just the education system, how they were brought up as human beings. That's what I believe in. Thank you so much, Sharif.
Thank you,
Thank
thank
you.
you, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Today's session is very, very important because all of the highly exclusive speakers and panelists they joined today's session. So I request all of our audience, those who observing our session, please share as much as possible. I'm sure this kind of things is very, very important because all of them has a huge experience from different area, and it will be really helpful for our youth community. So I request all of the university please share our content as much as possible. I'm sure your students, even policymakers from different countries, different corporations will learn many interesting things. Those who communicate with World Talent Economy Forum, this session will be very important for everyone. Yes, Professor Donalds. So what next? What the next strategy we can build for corporation, and what type of practical things we can bring from the global communities?
Well, businesses are not just corporations. I mean, corporations are just a way that you can get a number of people together so that they can all invest in the same organization.
That is right.
My uncle, going back to my uncle, he was kidding when he said he didn't understand what his people did. They had daily meetings, sort of like now we think of Scrum, but where it's important about the practical knowledge is one of the reasons his company was successful was he was a really good guy, really smart, really good guy. And he made relationships. So if he was bidding against another electrical engineering firm, say for a government contract, the people at the government would come to him and they'd tell him, well, your competitor gave a lower bid than you. And so then my uncle had such good relationships with his vendors that he'd go to his vendors and he'd say, hey, if you dropped it 2% here, we could come in under our competitor. And he would get the contract. And the point that I'm making here is that ultimately it was his personal relationships that made his company successful. It was a small company, about 500 people, but he never wanted it to go public because he felt that if the MBAs, the bean counters took it over, they would harm the people that worked there. And he felt that it was his obligation to take care of the people that worked for him. So where I'm going with this is that something that Rob has mentioned many times is that you want to be able to keep up with what's going on. If you don't keep up with what's going on, you'll make decisions. So the question is, where do we get knowledge? I mean, how do we know things? I mean, living in Silicon Valley and seeing, for an instance, pitches by lots of kids, most of them will never have a company. It's just, something that they do to try and learn and, hopefully start a company, but mostly. But the thing that's so cool is that these kids are looking around and finding out what the latest and greatest things are. So I am just blown away by some of the technologies that they know about that I don't know about, but I'm not just blown away, but I also learn. And so ultimately, you're going to learn from everyone around you. And so the example of perhaps Steve Ballmer being autocratic and not listening to the people around him is exactly the opposite of what my uncle did. He was kidding when he said he didn't, as I said, when he said he didn't know what was going on. But what he meant was that the people that worked for him had knowledge that he couldn't possibly have in his position, and it was worthwhile for him to be able to let that to have them acquire that knowledge and then share it with the other people in the company. So that's a good strategy. One of the things about academic that I think is very important is that if you go to a good academic program, especially if science is part of it, but even literary criticism does the same thing, which is that you learn to not believe anything. And science is not about knowing the absolute truth. It's not, we use the term fact simply as a placeholder because we can always invent new equipment. We can always invent new theories. We always have. And so any knowledge that we have is temporary, and it's going to change and grow. And if a person realizes that and it becomes part of them, then they realize that everyone around them is a potential source of knowledge and something that's useful. Everybody. There is not a single person on earth that doesn't know things that you don't know. And so ultimately, you kind of built into this whole thing. Another point about the academia is, in some cases, it's really the relationships that you make. The two kids that started Google met at Stanford, and they had an idea, and one of them had one skill and the other had another skill, and they decided, oh, well, we don't really want to do what we're doing at Stanford, and they went and started Google. That venture capitalists sometimes in Silicon Valley tell me, I've said this before on earlier shows, that they really like to invest in companies where Asian PhD students have dropped out of college. He said because their parents are so into them finishing college that they're going against their family and their social structure and everything else. And so they must be very, very dedicated to what they're doing. And that's just a flag for that. And so that talks back to what Rob is saying, is that you need to have the practical knowledge needs to be accompanied, or what Dr. Talib just said, the practical knowledge needs to be accompanied by your ability to be able to connect with people and get the resources that you need. And finally, I'm going on and on, so I'm going to say thank you right now and listen to the other people, because I could start a whole new topic.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rob, I have one thing in mind, like example, we have more dependency on technology. What do you think? The more we have dependency on technology, even though you are a great scholar on technology is another thing, but my observation from the youth communities, their reading habits, their engagement with the creative works and the creative project developments, like it's not working properly. Like even school systems and other things, there are more challenges. What do you think? Like if we depend more on technology, we can lose our analysis. Let's say this Harris debate, what I can remember from Oxford Union and the Cambridge Unions, I know world-class debaters, world-class scholars, and they have a very good reading habits, very good analytical skills. If AI win against this kind of human capability, especially analytical skills and these things, what do you think? Like our progressions and other things will stop, or you have different analysis?
Technology is a tool, and you have a choice. You have a choice with any tool to learn to use the tool or have the tool use you. With technological progression, it changes the priorities in terms of what you need to learn. For instance, right now, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time learning how to spell. Spell checkers are really common. They're not invasive. It's just not a skill you necessarily need to learn. Math skills, however, even though you could use a machine to do all the math you ever wanted to do, are critical to the formation of your brain. You need to understand math because you need that capability to get built up into your brain so you can understand the relationship between discrete elements. If you don't build that skill set, you will be with certain kinds of situations and certain kinds of decisions, unless you have a computer present, you won't be able to function. So it's a case of just being aware of how to use the tool. We were talking about the IBM Project Debater in the past, and one of the things that IBM is absolutely adamant about that I agree with is that as we develop these artificial intelligences, they should be developed in a way that they enhance people, not replace them. And that really speaks to a fundamental seed change in terms of how we often deploy technology. We often deploy technology to replace people, but the difficulty is if you do that at scale, you now end up with a world with a lot of people that don't have anything to do, which can be problematic in terms of governance and just having a healthy society. I think it was Musk that was convinced that as we develop AI, humans will become obsolete, and that is a very real risk. We could obsolesce ourselves. That should not be our goal. It may happen, but fundamentally, it's part of the fundamental mission of any race to assure its continuance. But that doesn't necessarily mean the race doesn't have to change. We do have to evolve, and against certain threats, we may have to evolve faster than nature requires. Currently, for instance, we're doing a heck of a job turning the planet into a place that can't sustain life. That will mean that we are going to have to evolve rapidly to become something that can live on the planet we created, or we're going to have to rapidly fix the problems that we are creating. But just going along without doing either one of those things is probably going to end with the death of the race, which should be unacceptable to everybody. So it comes back to just looking at a tool as to what it is. It's a tool. It can help you advance. It should be developed to help you advance, but you still need to learn to use the tool so the tool doesn't become a problem for you long term. And you also need to be able to stand up when people are making decisions with tools that put your life and your living at risk. In some cases, it may mean you need to stand up and retrain. In other cases, it may mean you need to stand up and say, no, this isn't right. If we put a machine in place of the people, it could end badly. I mean, give you an example. We were talking a while back about the hack on the Florida water company that was going to introduce deadly levels of chlorine to the water supply. A machine was altered to create the problem. A human overseeing the machine was what corrected the problem and kept it from killing people. That neither was fundamentally replaceable. You needed both components in order to have the outcome that you wanted, which was no dead people. So it's there certainly is a reason to be concerned. Kids using computers to cheat on tests, that's bad. It teaches a series of practices that I've seen go into companies and literally destroy the companies. You get a critical mass of kids coming out of school and starting a company, and they've cheated to get where they are. They're going to think that they can cheat through business, and you can't. There was that old Ghostbusters saying that when they tried to go into business, we can't go into business. That in business they actually want you to have results. And that's true. You actually have to accomplish stuff. You cannot cheat your way through business. But I've seen executives make it all to the top who've lied about their degrees, lied about their accomplishments, and then they get caught and they're terminated and become unemployable as a result. And think of this: it's if you don't have a lot of stuff and somebody takes it away from you, it's not a bad thing. But if you become an executive and you've got all the cars and the mansions, and somebody takes that away from you, it is, especially when you know you're not going to be able to reacquire it. That's disruptive. I mean, your life is pretty much destroyed, and you did it to yourself because you cheated through life. And I guess the one final comment: if you're doing something that requires you to cheat to do it, you're doing the wrong thing. You should be doing things that you enjoy, things that where if you go through the process, that process is enjoyable. It's not something you bypass. So in the end, machines can be good or bad. It really depends on how we use them. And I do agree that we need more focus on the proper way to use these systems, so we don't get so many instances of people using these systems improperly and doing themselves and the world damage.
Thank you. Dr. Eric.
I don't know how much more I can add to what everyone is saying here. Everybody has a very good point of view about these. You seem to still have this fear about AI taking over the world, and somehow I don't have this fear, and I've mentioned this in previous talks. Just like what Rob said, AI is just a tool. It's just a tool. There's no good or bad into it. And like what I was talking about earlier in the previous round about what natural resources are, right? AI is something that is like the oil that we discover, okay? It's what you make of it, okay? It's not going to take over humans. It's not going to take over our way of thinking. It's going to enhance it, actually. It's going to enhance what we do. Yeah, I view AI as what I think one of the other people say, an iPod, okay? People say, oh, Eric, can you play any instruments? And I go, yeah, I can play thousands of songs. I can play thousands of instruments. Here it is. This is what I use to play all these great songs, okay? And there are actual people who do that, okay? They're called DJs, okay? DJs, they don't use an iPod. They use their laptop because it's a little bit easier to manipulate things. But they play thousands of songs. And actually, they play the same 10 songs, but they have access to thousands of songs, and they play lots of different things, okay? And they make good 6 figures, 7 figures sometimes being DJs at parties and all these other stuff, and they know how to play these things very well. They make use of the technology, okay? AI is the same thing. It's how you make use of that technology. And you might say, well, it's going to get rid of a lot of people who think. I've talked about this, like the John Henry syndrome, right? I talked about John Henry, where he refuses to take new technology of the steam power hammer, and he kept using the manual 12-pound hammer to dig holes and stuff. Okay, use the technology, and then you will discover whole new ways of using it that nobody ever even envisioned. Okay, right now we're talking here using the internet. Back 40, 60 years ago, when what Adrian was talking about, when ARPA was creating ARPANET, they didn't have any idea that's what we're doing right now is possible. Okay, they were just happy to be able to send an email from one place to another that didn't take a week to be sent using snail mail. That's all they were hoping for. Okay, internet, hyperlinks, none of those things, right? I mean, hyperlinks is the World Wide Web, was discovered, invented back in early 1990s, 1991, I think, something like that. Right, Tim Berners-Lee, when he created the World Wide Web, it was just to make so that academicians can send their message, send their half-done work to their colleagues to read and take a look at, and maybe to link to, so that they don't have to keep, asking them, hey, can I see your pre-published paper so I can link to that, refer to that. So that was all they were doing. Having e-commerce and all that, none of that was envisioned by Tim Berners-Lee or the people who were creating the WWW, World Wide Web. So technology actually will create more jobs, and AI will create more jobs in the same way that the World Wide Web has created bazillions of new jobs that nobody would have envisioned. Okay, there are people who are, webmasters and web designers and all these other stuff, and now you have to learn all the latest, tools to do these things, and it has moved from practical wisdom, practical knowledge into an academic level now, right? You're now learning these things at schools, right? Web designs are being taught at four-year universities, and as well as maybe even in high school, I guess. I haven't really talked to school teachers in high schools, but I think, web design is being taught in high school. And if it's not taught in high school, they're certainly being used, right? this past year, everybody is online learning at school, and everybody figured out how to use Zoom or equivalent, maybe StreamYard, to teach things. And they've figured out how to use it in certain ways, and the students figured it out. And now they're going to have actual, how to use Zoom and being taught to other teachers and then administrators and all that. And that's what technology does. Don't fear technology in replacing jobs. It will definitely replace the job that it is meant to replace, for sure. Okay. But in return, you're going to have a tenfold increase in new jobs that nobody envisions. Okay. Nobody would have envisioned these things. 10 new jobs, and then out of that, 10 new jobs that people do envision, because these new jobs were created, that people become wealthier, that they get to use that money to buy things like food and stuff like that. They go to restaurants, and now you have the expected jobs that cater to people that are with greater wealth. Okay. When you don't have wealth, then you don't have businesses that would cater to them, which are the standard ones, the restaurants and the clothing and the housing and the furniture and all that. All those jobs cannot exist if you have people who are poor. But once people get money, then suddenly you can start selling fancy clothes and fancy furniture. Here in San Francisco, we have Soma, South of Market area. That district 30 years ago was meat packing and canning and things of that sort, desolate. By 6 p.m. every night, nobody was there. Okay. I mean, there were the late shift people. There were people who worked the graveyard shift, and they'll go there, but that place was empty at night. Okay. And equally, they were poor, because, who pays people who does things in canning and things of that sort. Okay. But now that area, South of Market, around Brannan and Bryant Streets, they're now where all the startups are. That's where Airbnb is, and Cruise and all these other companies, Cloudflare, Flare, and all that. All these companies are there now. Okay, Google has an office there, and now you have fancy restaurants. You have furniture stores, Roche Bobois, which is a famous high-end, French furniture store. Bang & Olufsen used to have a store there, but Bang & Olufsen is gone. They're last year technology, and all these fancy stuff that would never have existed, okay, in that area if they had kept it as canning and making Italian salamis and things of that sort. Growth.
Thank you.
And it's all because of technology.
Yes, definitely. When we develop world talent economy, because we believe the youth community, when they integrated their knowledge and skills with the technology, and they know how to utilize the technology properly, that time they can add new values for their economy. Even I'm from developing nations. I saw from the root level example, mobile phone, how it changed Bangladesh economy, Indian economies, even Malaysian economy, mobile money transferring.
Exactly.
It's give a new economical opportunities. So that is the practical experience we have as well. Professor Adrian, so you also have technological companies. Even I think our Airbnb advisor also with us, Dr. Talibs. So we will learn more how we can develop policy and other things. But Professor Adrian, that how academy can be more effective. Even when we invite like different scholar from Malaysia, University of Malaya, they said that like 70-80% of their research, they cannot produce the right research for the industry. And I think academy must need to be more effective for producing more good research as well as technologies. How we can do that? I think you have some initiative with your AR and VR companies and different interesting initiative you can share with our speakers and audience.
Yeah, well, as I said, there is a very different motivations for academic career and business career, and I think it's not going to change in the near term. But I think the most, let's say, successful universities for commercializing work is Stanford in California and MIT. So those two universities probably by themselves generate, the vast majority of the, worldwide technology transfer from academia to industry. And governments all around the world and try to reproduce the model, but it seems almost impossible to reproduce. So I don't know what is the magical recipe, but somehow, you have this right mix of, extremely high level university attracting extremely smart students and surrounded by a lot of venture capitalists and people willing to, give money to those graduates and those students. And so I honestly don't know what is the secret sauce, because if I did, I would be a billionaire, and I'm not. So, but somehow, apart from Stanford and MIT, most universities have almost zero, actual commercialization. But there is the two successful models, and I think it's just where they are, the situation they're in, the fact that you've got very smart students and very top level university with a lot of people who are very rich surrounding that place and willing to give them money. And maybe the other speakers will correct me, but as far as I know, they're the overwhelming majority of technology transfer is from those two universities.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, you are a politician, and I am also learning from you how to interact with the grassroots level peoples. And my question is that, like, when you run UNs and this kind of different big organizations, those who actually have strong collaborations around the world. So when like people like you develop policy for industry, policy for academy, policy for the youth communities, like how it works, like, and how it's implemented, different kind of good policy, and how the different even developed nations or developing nations develop better policy for their youth community especially.
Okay, let me start where it said that technology is a tool. It definitely is a tool, because I completely agree that technology is not going to take away our businesses. What will take away our businesses is our dull way of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And teaching is not about knowledge anymore, because knowledge is available at our fingertip. I come from a generation that did not have television in our home when I was growing up. So that's how old I am. I know exactly what it means to be deprived of the current technologies that our kids are enjoying. But doesn't mean that their life is better than mine. What I'm saying here is that the key to all of what you said is about the environment that you live in. How are you taught, your personality? How are you brought up to be? How do you take decisions? How do you pick your friends? How do you take decisions? That's the most important part. And this has nothing to do with how intelligent or how smart you are. Sometimes you don't have to be too smart or too knowledgeable, but you have a good personality. That's what makes money. That's what makes success nowadays. I was lucky because I was exposed to some good people around me. And that's the key, I believe, to success. It's how you're brought up. What are the ideals that you have in your life? How do you manage your life? Your personality is by far much more important nowadays than any technological know-how or any skill that you may acquire in your life.
Thank you. We directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. So,
You want me to start?
yes, Professor Adrian, I request him for concluding remarks for today.
Okay.
Professor Adrian, yeah.
Yes, well, yes. Well, I think if you're a young person, then I think it is good. It is important to go to a good university because not that you're going to use what you learn really in your career, but you learn how to solve problems. And I think one of the other speakers said, to have a critical mind, and so that's what you really learn in university. And then second of all, try to go to the best university that you can go to, because branding still is very important. When companies hire graduates, they look at the branding of the university, the reputation of the university. But then, apart from that, I think that unless you want to become a professor like me, then really the most important thing is what you do after university. But still, as I said, go to a good university, and you get the basic, let's say, skill set that you'll use in your career. But you won't actually really use the details of what you learn in courses. But it's still very important to have that fundamental framework and try to get the best branding you can get from the start to get you a leg up in your career. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for joining today, Dr. Eric.
Yeah. Advice is similar to what Dr. Adrian was saying. Yeah, you still should go to school, but when you're there, take advantage of that natural resource, which is the people there, both the fellow students and the professors and the teachers. Okay,
That's
take advantage of them, and take advantage of the beyond learning. Befriend them, befriend both fellow students. They're not your competitors. Okay, yeah, you're all grubbing for the same grades, and I don't know how some schools are, whether some teachers, say, okay, only the top 10% gets an A and so forth. I don't know if that's how some schools do it or not, or some courses do it or not. But competing for grades is not the right thing to do as a student. Okay. Learn to work with your fellow students. That's one of the poor things that the academics, at least here in the United States, does, is that it still treats students to work independently as opposed to a group. I don't know how many classes are now being taught in a group setting. I haven't been back to a university to kind of check, so I could be completely off by a whole generation, and maybe it's different now. So I could be completely wrong. But in my time, it was do your own homework, do your own exam, don't copy other people, and so forth. And those are weird rules now, I think. I mean, cheating, like what Rob said, is bad. Okay. And cheating in school is just as bad, but working as a group is a skill to learn, and it should actually be taught as early as possible. But that's another comment for another time. But take advantage of it. Befriend your professors. Talk to them. Use them beyond just getting information from them, because like others have said, information is free now. It's all over the place. You can get information from everywhere. Use them to bounce ideas off because they have experience and knowledge. Okay, use other students to bounce ideas off. Collaborate with them. If you can get a professor to say, "Hey, I would like to do that with you," boom, I would. You got some pretty good moxie there, and you got some pretty good idea, because if you can get a professor that's willing to stick his or her neck out to do something with you outside of academia, that is a pretty good thing. Okay, so work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit. I don't believe you can tell people, you can advise people on the path to take unless you know where it is they're going. And there are a lot of careers that don't require university or college degrees. For instance, if you like working on cars, you can run an automotive mechanic shop without a degree. It might help to go to a technical trade school to refine your skills, and it certainly would be helpful to pick up some basic business knowledge with regard to financials, so you can manage the business. But you don't need a 4-year degree for that. And so really, the first step you should be taking at this stage is really just trying to discover what it is you want to do. And what it is you want to do will define your path on how to get there. In some cases, it may be a degree. If you want to work for a large technology company, not having a degree is going to be a problem. Though I should point out a number of the studies that have been done, even in Google, have indicated that people that don't have technical degrees actually do better in management than the people that do. So it's really a case of first knowing what you want to do, knowing what you're good at, defining a path to get there that best meets your skills and desires, and then executing on that particular plan. But be clear on this, that where you need to spend the effort is really deciding where it is you want to go. I'm not convinced university is a great place to go to discover where it is you want to go. You get cubbyholed too fast. You don't really get the breadth that you need unless you force it into looking at other areas. A lot of times people, for instance, in the medical field, they become doctors because their parents were doctors. I think that's a horrible mistake because being a doctor requires a certain mindset. It requires a certain kind of focus to do it right. And if you don't have those things, you're probably going to be miserable after spending 16 years in various schools, getting a medical degree and finishing through your your hospital work. So in the end, just remember this: if you don't know where you're going, you probably won't get there. Your initial goal is to discover what it is you enjoy, figure out what it is you want your life to look at, and then execute against that plan. And be aware that that plan is going to change as you grow. But right now, getting as much breadth as you can possibly get, exploring as many opportunities as you can possibly get, is going to help you find those things that you love. And recognize this: a lot of people live for retirement. They work their entire life for retirement, and then they retire. And I've never seen a more miserable group of folks than people that live like that when they retire, because now they don't know what to do with themselves. I mean, they work their entire life for retirement, and they find they don't enjoy retirement. And often they die within years of retirement just because they lose the will to live. Not a way to be. At my age, I'm seeing an awful lot of people like that all of a sudden, and I don't wish that for you. So spend your time discovering what it is you love, find your muse, execute on the muse, and remember, it's the journey that counts, not the destination. If you're not enjoying the journey, then you're on the wrong path. Find something you enjoy and make it your life's work, and you're just going to be happier overall.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
Well, I want to mention one thing and leverage off of what Eric said, which is that, and everyone else, I mean, all talked about this a little bit, which is that if machines replace us, if we're being replaced by mechanical slaves and we compete for their jobs, what are we competing to be? I want to also address the thing about debate, which is that ultimately when we make a decision, whether it's solving a calculus problem or anything else, there comes a point when we feel we've got the right answer. And the key to that is feel. So ultimately, all of our decisions are made emotionally. And that's something I think in debate, if you go all the way back to Aristotle, he talks about the idea that there's facts, there's emotion, and there's politics. And a good debater understands that the ultimate decision, that feeling, that is going to be a feeling. And so just debating with facts actually probably will never work in the long term. I mean, because we have this thing, theory of mind, where all of us know that each other knows the same things we know. We wouldn't be able to talk about a chair unless I knew you knew what a chair was. And organizations are far more abstract. So what Dr. Talib said about the necessity or like the environment and how the environment creates you and makes you who you are is so critical, because the question was asked is, why is Stanford so successful? And one of the answers is that it was deliberately, on purpose, Vannevar Bush and Terman made the business park inside of Stanford, and they would give employees. Business people could go to Stanford at 10 cents on the dollar. So they would pay a tenth of what other people did. So they deliberately created these relationships. For anyone that wants to be successful, you have to go where what you do happens. If you want to be in technology or business formation, I argue that Silicon Valley really, what they do is they create businesses, and that technology changes yawn. It doesn't really matter because they have the infrastructure, the venture capitalists, the intellectual property lawyers, blah, 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 that are necessary to start businesses. And that's what makes the money in Silicon Valley. So if that's what you want to do, that's where you want to go. But if you're into music, go to Los Angeles, go to New York. If you're into fashion, go to New York. Every single solitary thing that you want to do is ultimately going to come to you from the knowledge that exists distributed across everyone. Knowledge is everywhere. It's not in books. It's not in it's and so just I want to make a conjunction with that because of what people said about your passion. Remember that what you think you are is created by what you could possibly be. And where you are in society, your family, the people that you grew up with, and so on, are going to tell you what it is that you should be. And if you, or what's possible for you to be. And if you stray off the course a little bit, they'll push you back into being what it is that they think you should be. So it's very, very difficult to know what it is that who you are and what you want to do. And that's why the environment is so incredibly important, because and maybe that's the best thing about universities, is that you get into a completely different environment. You leave home and you're suddenly in a place where all of a sudden you can be these different people. But as you start developing what it is that you want to do, go where it is that's happening. And that's my advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Dr. Talib, what's your concluding remarks for today's sessions? And thank you from core of my heart for all of your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forums. Every day we are growing, we are learning, we are developing different plan and strategy, as well as we are implementing. Our major focus is academy, as well as research and developments. Hopefully, all of your support can help us to grow a perfect academic center for our youth community. So what are the concluding remarks for today, Dr. Talib?
Thank you so much, Salim. I think it's all about people at the end of the day. I think you go to universities, you go to academia because you want to separate yourself from the reality that you're living in. You want to go from your home to another place. It doesn't matter where you go. It's the environment that university provides to you that matters at the end of the day. And you need to open your heart, open your mind, and open your soul to receiving new things. It's your personality that matters. Leadership at the end of the day is what matters. And you can become a leader not by knowing more, but by knowing how to deal with people, how to position yourself in a certain environment. That's why I left university, because I needed to get away from my family. That's what I encourage everybody to do. You can go to Bangladesh, you can go to the States, you can go to UK, whatever it is. What makes a good university is the environment that it provides. It's nothing more, nothing less. Stanford is an excellent university because it provides a very particular environment. I want to echo what was said here. Open your heart, open your mind, and embrace people. Embrace your students. Teamwork. Become friends with your professor. Don't build these walls around yourself. That's what I'm most interested in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share today's session as much as possible. I'm sure with this kind of experienced peoples, you can learn many important things. And I really request the rural areas people, please share the content. And if you need any kind of support from World Talent Economy Forum, you directly can communicate with us. We can support you as much as possible. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you, Professor Donalds, Mr. Rob, Dr. Eric, Professor Adrians, and Dr. Talib for joining today's session and contribute for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.